member from Foothills.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals just aren't worth the cost. Today, Hunger Count revealed more than 2 million Canadians went to a food bank in March, up 6% from the previous year, and food bank use has doubled since 2019, and a third of those relying on food banks are children, meaning millions of Canadian families can't feed their kids. The NDP Liberals increased the carbon tax 23%, leading to record-breaking food bank use. They're not done. They want to quadruple that tax. Will the Prime Minister end the suffering he has caused and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize that we've been living through expensive times, and that's exactly why we've made investments in Canadians and their families. Investments like the Canada Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker, introducing the Canada Disability Benefit, increased investments in housing, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition has continued to oppose us at each and every step, and now has announced his plans to cut even further. We will fight for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
I'm glad at least one Liberal minister understands Canadians are living in expensive times that their policies caused. But let me help her with her answer. Food insecurity in Canada is up 111%. 2 million Canadians went to a food bank in a single month. Food inflation is a staggering 37% higher in Canada than it is in the United States. The Parliamentary Budget Officer already confirmed what Canadians know: the carbon tax is all pain, no gain. Will the Prime Minister stop his tax tricks and give Canadians the treat of a carbon tax election this Halloween?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have known for a very long time that the Conservatives are crying crocodile tears when it comes to the most vulnerable in Canada. And today, the Conservative leader actually admitted it. He said, and I quote, "We're going to cut 2 programs for sure and more beyond that." So now we know they're going to cut childcare. They're going to cut the Canada Child Benefit. They're going to cut dental care. They're going to cut pharmacare. They're going to cut support for seniors. That is unacceptable. We won't let them do that.
Although the Chair couldn't hear, there was some back and forth. I'm going to ask Honourable Members please not to take the floor unless recognised. The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 9 years of the Liberal NDP government, they're not worth the cost or hunger. Food Banks Canada came out with a report that more than 2 million Canadians visited a food bank in March, a 6% increase from last year. 1 in 5 of those food bank users are workers, 70% are renters, and as Canadians' incomes decline, this government doubled housing costs and rent. Canadians' incomes are lower than they've ever been. And starving Canadians further that this woke NDP Prime Minister will quadruple their carbon tax scam. Why not just call a carbon tax election now and let Canadians decide?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is that everywhere in the world, the costs of living have been incredibly difficult to deal with. And the Conservative solution to cut the things that provide vulnerable people support will put them in a much worse position. And let me put it into clarity. The earlier question referenced the United States. Do you know in the United States that the life expectancy is 5 years lower? Did you know in the United States that the average citizen has 6 more years in illness and disease? That's what their cuts would bring. That's the truth of what they're offering, and that's why we oppose their agenda.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
This is the health minister that brought scurvy back to Canada. And they don't want to talk about the 2 million Canadians that they sent into a food bank in a single month, a third of which are children. They don't want to talk about going down the path of their radical plan to quadruple the carbon tax when they know 1 in 4 Canadians are already skipping meals and 1 in 5 food bank users are workers. They also don't want to talk about the fact that their plan was to always double housing costs. Why don't they just do everyone a favor? Why don't these economic arsonists stop gaslighting Canadians and call a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, what else is back? Tuberculosis, measles, syphilis. Why does this happen? It's because the slogan machines on the other side, diving deep into the threads on Reddit, are creating and spreading information that confuses the health landscape and means that things that we had long put behind us come back. We cannot afford the kind of misinformation and the kind of nonsense that they spin, not only because it is not true, but because it put lives at risk, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Peterborough-Kawartha.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. Today, Food Banks Canada released their 2024 hunger count, and the stats are heartbreaking and record-breaking. Over 2 million Canadians used a food bank in 1 month. 700,000 of those users in 1 month in Canada were children. And what's this Prime Minister's response? Well, he's going to drive up the cost of food even more by quadrupling the carbon tax. Canadians can't afford him. His caucus doesn't want him. So why doesn't he let Canadians decide what they want and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when Canadians are facing tough times, what should a government do? They should provide programs that provide supports to them, like the Canada Child Benefit, like making childcare more affordable, like dental care for seniors and vulnerable Canadians. But what is the Conservative plan? Well, it's to cut those programs. It's to take away the very supports that Canadians rely on when times are tough. Mr. Speaker, we know the Conservative plan, and it's to balance the books on the backs of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we won't stand for that. We're going to stand for Canadians. Thank you.
Very good.
The honourable member from Peterborough-Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians will not stand for that gaslighting. After 5 years, in the last 5 years, food bank usage has doubled. It is the highest in history. People who used to volunteer at the food bank are now lining up to use it. Food banks are running out of food in Canada. Mr. Speaker, please, for the love of God, let them call a carbon tax election. This Prime Minister doesn't seem to understand the human consequences of his policies, that when you tax the farmer who grows the food, the trucker who ships the food, you end up taxing the Canadian who has to buy the food into poverty. Enough. Call a carbon tax election.
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
$7,782 a year tax-free. That's the Canada Child Benefit that has helped lift over 450,000 children out of poverty. That member is calling gaslighting is real money that's helping real Canadians. Who's doing the gaslighting, Mr. Speaker? It's the Conservative members of Parliament that want to sell slogans instead of solutions. It's them who say that they can fix things while cutting the services and the programs that Canadians rely on. We're going to do real things that help real people. That's what we do on this side of the House.
Beautiful.
Ask the honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon, please, to not take the microphone and not take the floor unless he's recognised by the Speaker.